My name is Alex Miller, and I never thought the sharpest wound in my life would come from my own daughter's lips. After 15 years of paying her mortgages, her medical bills, her vacations, and even her children's tuition, I expected at least respect. Instead, one March evening at the dinner table, she looked me in the eyes and said, "Then don't expect to stay here much longer." That moment shattered the last piece of trust I had left. What followed was a journey of painful choices, cold betrayals, and an unexpected freedom I hadn't felt in decades. But before I share how I turned humiliation into a new life, I want to ask, where are you watching this from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like mine. I can still hear her words as if they were branded into my chest. Don't expect to stay here much longer. My own daughter Sarah stood across from me in the dining room, her face burning red with anger. The smell of mashed potatoes and roast beef still hung in the air, but to me it felt like poison. The mahogany table we had gathered around for years, the same table where I once celebrated her birthdays, where we prayed over Thanksgiving meals, had turned into a courtroom. And the verdict she delivered was exile. 5 years earlier, after my wife Helen passed, Sarah had insisted I move in. "Family takes care of family," she said back then, smiling warmly. I believed her. I thought it was love, thought it was her way of keeping me close when loneliness pressed against my chest. But that night, when she uttered those cold words, I realized I had been wrong. Her kindness had been conditional, tied to the steady stream of money I provided. Mark, my son-in-law, had spent the evening parading his latest scheme like a salesman who'd cornered a gullible customer. A startup app, he said, a revolutionary platform just waiting for investors. His eyes lit up as he showed me graphs on his tablet, numbers dancing like promises of a future he would never create. Then came the ask, $200,000. Not a loan, he said, an investment. But in truth, it was another withdrawal from the bank of Dad. I had reached my breaking point. For 15 years, I had carried them. Weddings, mortgage payments, tuition bills, even car loans. I had written checks until my pen nearly ran dry. That evening, when I refused, the silence was sharp. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the hardwood floor, echoing like a gavel. Sarah's cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with fury. Her words cut through me. "If you're not part of this family's success, maybe you shouldn't be part of this family at all." She said it as if decades of love, sleepless nights raising her, and sacrifices I had made could be erased with one declaration. I stood there numb, trying to reconcile the daughter I remembered from her prom night, radiant in her dress, with the woman before me glaring with contempt. When had her gratitude turned into expectation? When had I become just an obstacle between her and Mark's fantasies? Later that night, in the solitude of the bedroom they had given me upstairs, I stared at the photos on my nightstand. Sarah at 16, Sarah at 33, holding her newborn Sarah at Christmas with Helen and me. Those pictures mocked me now. They were reminders of a love that had somehow soured into entitlement. My heart was heavy, but something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had never dared to before: life without them. And in that quiet, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I made a vow. Tomorrow, I would no longer be their ATM. Tomorrow, I would reclaim what was left of my dignity. The next evening, the same mahogany table turned into a stage for Mark's grand performance. His tablet glowed with charts, graphs, and flashy colors, each one designed to convince me his startup was the opportunity of a lifetime. His voice carried the tone of a man who believed he was destined for greatness if only someone else paid the bill. "This is it, Alex. he said, leaning forward as though his passion could blind me to the truth. Beta testing is complete, the platform is ready. All we need is backing for servers and office space. $200,000 and the returns will change everything. For Sarah, for the kids, for all of us. I stared at the screen, but what I saw wasn't numbers or projections. I saw the past 15 years of checks written and sacrifices made. I saw the down payment for their house, the tuition bills for Emma and John, the medical bills when Mark's insurance lapsed. Each figure on his screen wasn't a promise of the future. It was a shadow of the past piled high on my shoulders. Mark, I said slowly, my voice rougher than I intended, I've been helping financially for 15 years. This isn't support anymore. It's dependence. The words dropped like a stone into a still pond. Sarah froze with the bowl of mashed potatoes suspended in her hands. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the dim hum of the chandelier above us. Then Sarah's expression hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Dad," she said sharply, "this isn't about the past. This is about family, about building a future together. You've always said family comes first." My hands shook as I placed the fork down beside my plate. "Family does come first, Sarah. But this isn't family. This is business. And I'm tired of being treated like your personal bank." Her face reddened, her voice rising with anger. "If you're not willing to help us when we really need you, then maybe you shouldn't expect to stay here much longer." The words slammed into me a second time, heavier now, that they were repeated, deliberate, not a slip of the tongue. I felt the room spin. I had buried my wife, moved into this house to escape loneliness, to believe her words, that family would take care of family. Yet here she was, turning those words into a weapon. Mark shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing the pitch had failed, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat gracefully. "You're making a mistake, Alex. This isn't charity. This is an investment. Without it, you're leaving Sarah and the kids to struggle. Do you really want to do that?" His words revealed the truth I had ignored for too long. They didn't see me as a father or grandfather anymore. They saw me as leverage, as capital, as a means to an end. That night, long after they stormed off to their bedroom, I sat alone at the table, staring at the fork still lying on the floor where it had fallen. The chandelier light reflected off its polished surface, reminding me that sometimes it takes something small, a clatter of silver against wood, to wake a man from years of denial. For me, that night was the wake-up call. And though I didn't say it out loud, I knew the life I had with them was already over. The sound of that fork hitting the floor never left me. Every time I replayed Sarah's words in my head, "Maybe you shouldn't be part of this family at all," the echo grew sharper, like a knife twisting deeper. I picked it up later that night, cold and lifeless in my hand, and realized that was how they saw me now. Not as a man who had given them everything, but as an old utensil, useful until it no longer served their needs. I sat upstairs in the small bedroom they had given me, staring at the pictures on my nightstand. Sarah at 16, smiling in her prom dress. Sarah at 33, holding her newborn Emma. Christmases, birthdays, vacations, all framed moments of what I thought was love. But now in that silence, the pictures mocked me. They whispered the truth somewhere along the way. Gratitude had turned into entitlement. I had raised Sarah to believe in hard work, to take responsibility for her choices. Yet here she was, married to a man who chased fantasies and dragged her into his delusions. And worse, she defended him, elevating his schemes above her own father's dignity. I thought about Helen then, how she had warned me not to give too much, not to make our daughter dependent. "Alex," she used to say, "support is one thing, but spoiling is another. If you carry them too long, they'll forget how to walk on their own. She had been right, and I had ignored her wisdom. Downstairs, I could hear the muffled sound of Sarah banging dishes in the kitchen. Each clang was a message: anger, disappointment, blame. Mark had retreated to his office, no doubt already drafting his next pitch, calculating his next move. And me, I sat in that bedroom, realizing that after 75 years on this earth, I had allowed myself to be reduced to nothing more than a wallet with a heartbeat. But anger wasn't the only feeling rising inside me. Something else stirred, a quiet, steady strength I hadn't felt in years. I thought about the countless checks I had written the wedding that cost me $50,000, the mortgage payments that kept their house standing, the tuition that put their children through school. I thought about the vacations, the medical bills, the broken cars I had replaced. And for the first time, I asked myself, what had they given me in return? The answer was bitter, but clear. Neglect. Forgotten birthdays. Hospital stays with only a single visit, a bouquet of flowers and excuses. The balance sheet of love was empty on their side. That night, I made a decision. No more silent compliance. No more guilt-driven checks. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming my dignity. I would gather every receipt, every canceled check, every transfer I had made, and face the truth, not to throw in their faces, but to remind myself of what I had sacrificed. As I turned off the light and lay in bed, I realized something important: being cast out might not be a curse. It might be a blessing. Because sometimes the only way to find yourself again is to walk away from those who never truly valued you. The morning light crept through the blinds, cutting pale lines across my room. I sat at my desk with the filing cabinet open, drawers pulled wide like old wounds finally exposed. For decades, I had kept meticulous records, a habit from my military days sharpened further by Helen's insistence on always keep receipts. And there they were, years of my life reduced to slips of paper and signatures. The first folder I pulled was labeled Wedding, June 2009. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, my signature was at the bottom of every contract. $50,000 for one night of fairy tales. I could still remember Helen smiling at Sarah in her gown, whispering that our daughter deserved the best. At the time, I believed it too. Now, staring at the receipts, I realized that night had been the beginning of a pattern, one I had never managed to break. Another folder read, Mortgage. Page after page of canceled checks stretched back 5 years. Each one bore my handwriting, each one proof that Sarah and Mark's home was really built on my sacrifice. My pen scratched across a notepad as I began to calculate. 12 months multiplied by 5 years, multiplied again by payments I never missed, $252,000. My chest tightened. That was just the house. Next came car payments, insurance premiums, emergency repairs. Mark's SUV after his old sedan gave out. Sarah's dental surgery when they had no coverage. Even their anniversary trip to Hawaii, something they claimed they couldn't miss, something that somehow became my responsibility. Tuition for Emma and John, $15,000 here, $8,000 there. Each folder, each slip of paper was another reminder of how far I had gone, how completely I had blurred the line between fatherly love and financial enslavement. The calculator beeped with every entry. 300,000, 350, 400. By the time the final number glowed on the screen, I felt the blood drain from my face. $487,000. Nearly $500,000. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the total as if it were a headstone. It wasn't just money. It was years of work, years of saving with Helen, years of denying ourselves vacations and luxuries so we could retire in peace. And all of it had been poured into Sarah's life, into a daughter who now looked me in the eye and said I didn't belong. The clock on the nightstand ticked steadily, almost mockingly. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't just about being used anymore. It was about survival, my dignity, my right to live the rest of my days as more than a doormat. I stacked the receipts, neatly slid the folders back into the cabinet, and locked it. Then I placed the key in my pocket. It was symbolic, but it mattered. From now on, control of my life would remain with me, not with Sarah or Mark. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to Helen's photo, "You were right. I carried them too long. Tomorrow, I put this burden down." That night, I sat at the desk longer than I should have, staring at the numbers glowing on the calculator screen. $487,000. Half a lifetime of careful saving gone. Helen's life insurance, my pension, our nest egg, it had all flowed quietly into Sarah and Mark's lives, while they carried on as if it were owed to them. I could almost hear Helen's voice in the silence, soft but firm, "Alex, enough is enough." The phone sat on the nightstand, its screen dark, but I could still see Sarah's name burned into my memory from all the transfers I had authorized in her favor. Each month, the bank had quietly drained another 4,000, another 6, sometimes more, and I never stopped it. I told myself I was keeping peace in the family, but peace built on silence is just a different kind of war. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I'd memorized years ago, Wells Fargo's 24-hour customer service line. The young woman's voice on the other end was polite, professional. "How may I help you tonight, Mr. Miller?" she asked. My voice was steady, almost unnervingly calm. "Cancel all automatic transfers to account ending in 4739. There was a pause. "Sir, are you sure that account has been receiving funds for many years?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Cancel them. Effective immediately." For a moment I wondered if my hand would shake, but it didn't. When I ended the call 20 minutes later, I sat in the quiet and realized I had just severed the financial cord that had bound me for 15 years. It felt like cutting through chains. The next step came almost naturally. In the bottom of the filing cabinet lay a folder labeled Power of Attorney. Sarah's neat signature beside mine, granting her authority over my accounts for convenience. I had signed it after knee surgery when trips to the bank had been too difficult. At the time, I thought it was practical. Now I saw it for what it was, a weapon I had placed in her hands. I fed the papers into the shredder one by one, listening to the machine chew through years of misplaced trust. The sound was harsh, final. By the time the last page emerged in strips, I felt lighter, as though I had shed a burden I didn't even know I was carrying. For the first time in months, maybe years, a smile tugged at the corner of my lips. Before I went to bed, I opened my laptop and typed a simple phrase into the search bar, Seattle one-bedroom apartments. Photos of small but tidy spaces filled the screen, places where peace didn't cost $4,000 a month. Places where nobody would slam dishes in the kitchen to punish me. Places where I could sit at a table and not be accused of being selfish. I bookmarked 3 listings before closing the computer. As I turned off the light, I looked once more at Helen's picture. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "I take my life back." For the first time since she passed, I believed it. The following morning, the first thing I did was reach for the phone, not to call Sarah, not to negotiate with Mark, but to confirm my decision. I dialed the bank again, this time with a new kind of steel in my voice. "This is Alex Miller. I want confirmation that all transfers to account ending in 4739 are officially canceled." The representative hesitated, typing quickly. "Yes, sir. All future transfers have been stopped." For 15 years, money had flowed out of my accounts like water from a broken faucet, dripping steadily, until it formed a river that sustained a family who saw me not as a father, but as an ATM. Now, for the first time, the faucet was dry. I sat in silence, letting the reality settle over me. Freedom didn't roar, it whispered. I hung up and looked around my bedroom, the walls lined with family photos that now felt like strangers. It wasn't my home anymore, not really. It was theirs, built on my sacrifices. I had lived in their world long enough. Today, I would begin reclaiming mine. The filing cabinet still sat open, papers strewn across my desk like battlefield maps. My eyes fell on the folder labeled Power of Attorney. Sarah's handwriting stared back at me, her name beside mine, granting her full access to my finances. That document had been my mistake, signed in a haze of post-surgery pain, meant as convenience, but twisted into control. I pulled the papers free and fed them into the shredder. The machine growled, chewing through ink and signatures until nothing remained but strips of confetti. Watching Sarah's authority dissolve into scraps was more satisfying than I expected. Each strip that fell into the bin felt like a lock clicking shut, a barrier forming between me and the manipulation I had allowed for far too long. When the shredder fell silent, I leaned back and let out a long breath. For the first time in years, my money and my life belonged to me. That afternoon, I carried a plain white envelope to the kitchen. On the table, I placed it neatly in the center, as if it were another plate set for dinner. Inside one sheet of paper held my farewell, Sarah and Mark, I've moved out. The keys are on the counter. My financial support has ended. You wanted independence from my expectations. Now you have independence from my assistance. Don't contact me until you're ready to apologize. I didn't sign it with anger. I signed it with resolve. As I walked back upstairs, I passed by Sarah's piano in the living room, the one she had claimed after Helen's funeral. She had said it would be perfect for when Emma brought her children around someday. I paused, my hand resting on the polished wood. It was Helen's pride once, but I let it go. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Upstairs, I pulled a small suitcase from the closet. My clothes, my books, the medals I had earned in the army, those were mine. The recliner in the living room, the jewelry box, Sarah coveted the rest of the furniture, they could keep them. Let them sit surrounded by things. I was leaving to reclaim something greater, my peace. That night, as I zipped the last bag shut, I felt lighter. Tomorrow, the movers would come, and I would step out of their house for the final time, not as a defeated old man, but as someone who had finally chosen himself. The next day, the hum of a moving truck idling in the driveway replaced the usual morning sounds of Sarah clattering dishes. I had scheduled everything carefully, knowing they'd both be gone. Sarah's Friday shift at the cafe kept her busy until the afternoon, and Mark always disappeared to his co-working space to pitch his dreams to anyone who would listen. For once, their absence was a gift. The movers were young, polite, and efficient. Their leader, a stocky kid with kind eyes, looked over the list I handed him. So everything marked with blue tape goes, everything else stays. Is that right, Mr. Miller? I nodded. That's right. He glanced around the house, his eyes lingering on the grand piano in the living room. What about that? It's a beautiful piece. I shook my head. Leave it. It belongs to them now. Piece by piece, the workers carried out the things that mattered most: my desk, where I had written letters to Helen, the bookshelf that held volumes I'd collected over decades, and the medals I'd earned during my service. Each item that left the house felt like a fragment of myself being restored. I realized then that I wasn't losing a home. I was reclaiming one. The hardest item to part with was Helen's jewelry box. Sarah had insisted I keep it after her mother passed, telling me it should stay with me until Emma was old enough to inherit pieces someday. But the box didn't feel safe here anymore, not in a house where love had been turned into currency. I tucked it carefully into a moving box marked private, making a note to decide later what to do with it. By noon, the last of my things had been loaded. The leader handed me the bill, giving me a small discount for being a veteran. I thanked him, slipped him a tip, and walked through the house one last time. Each room was filled with ghosts. The living room where Helen and I had once celebrated Christmas with Sarah. The kitchen where Sarah used to bake cookies as a child. The hallway lined with family portraits that now felt like lies. I stopped in the dining room where it had all unraveled just days before. The mahogany table sat polished and perfect, waiting for another meal that would never come. On its surface, I placed the plain white envelope with my note. No anger, no accusations, just the truth written plainly. My keys clinked softly as I set them beside it. For a long moment I stood there, hand resting on the back of the chair where I had once sat as head of the table. It felt different now. No longer a place of honor, but a reminder of what had been taken for granted. I whispered to the empty room, "Goodbye, Helen. Goodbye, Sarah." Then I turned and walked out the front door. As the moving truck pulled away, carrying the pieces of my past toward a new beginning, I didn't look back. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. In its place was something I hadn't felt in years, the open road leading me toward freedom. That evening, I unlocked the door of a modest one-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle. The air inside was still and clean, untouched by resentment. I set down my bags, opened a pizza box I'd ordered, and ate at my own pace, in my own space. The silence was not empty, it was chosen. The first night in that small Seattle apartment felt like stepping into another life. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it was mine. No slammed dishes, no guilt-laden silences, no schemes whispered from the next room. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint noise of traffic drifting up from the street below. I sat on the edge of the bed, a slice of cold pizza in hand, and realized that solitude wasn't a punishment, it was a gift. Still, I knew peace wouldn't last without protection. Sarah and Mark had grown accustomed to living off my generosity. They wouldn't let it go easily. That thought led me the following Monday morning through the revolving doors of First National Bank. The lobby smelled faintly of marble polish and coffee, its polished floors gleaming under fluorescent lights. James Clark, a banker, 20 years my junior, greeted me with a handshake as firm as his suit was crisp. We sat in his office overlooking Pike Street, papers neatly stacked on his mahogany desk. "Mr. Miller, I see you've canceled the recurring transfers," he said, adjusting his glasses as he typed commands into his computer. "Would you like to review the full history?" "Yes," I replied. "Every penny." The printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page. James placed the stack in front of me, his professional composure faltering as his eyes skimmed the numbers. "This totals nearly $500,000, Mr. Miller. Over 15 years. I nodded, my jaw set. "I know. That's why I'm here. I want to make sure what's left is protected." From the bank, I walked 3 blocks to Robert Fisher's law office, a man whose reputation for asset protection was whispered about among veterans at the community center. His secretary squeezed me in after I mentioned both estate planning and family dispute. Robert was brisk, sharp-eyed, and thorough. He spread documents across the conference table like a general preparing battle plans. "At your age, asset protection is not just wise, it's essential. We'll set up an irrevocable trust. Nevada jurisdiction, if you're comfortable with that, offers strong protection. Your daughter will have no claim to these funds once it's established. Make Emma the beneficiary," I said without hesitation. My granddaughter had never asked me for a dime. She deserved better than to be dragged down by her parents' greed. For 2 hours, I signed papers. Each signature felt like a nail sealing shut the door to manipulation. A notary public verified the documents with precise efficiency, her stamp hitting the paper like a gavel. When the last form slid into the folder, Robert looked up with something almost like admiration. "Mr. Miller, you've just built a financial fortress." Walking back to my apartment leather portfolio under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of $500,000 given away was still there but no longer crushing me. My money was safe. My dignity was intact. That night, as the sun dipped behind Seattle's skyline, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark: "Dad, we need to talk. Coming by tonight at 7. I stared at the screen, then deleted it without replying. Let him come. This time, I wasn't the man he thought he could manipulate. At exactly 7 o'clock, my doorbell chimed. I had been expecting it the way a soldier expects the enemy's next move. Through the peephole, I saw Mark's face distorted by the glass, carefully arranged into what he must have thought was an expression of humility. In one hand, he held a bouquet of yellow roses still wrapped in grocery store plastic. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Alex," he said with practiced warmth, "may I come in?" I hesitated just long enough to remind him this was my space now, not his. Then I stepped back, allowing him entry. His eyes flicked around the apartment, scanning the bare walls, the second-hand furniture, the modest kitchen. I caught the faint curl of disappointment in his mouth before he masked it with a smile. "Very minimalist," he said, settling himself on the couch without waiting to be invited. He placed the flowers on the counter like they were a peace treaty. I didn't move to get a vase. "Sarah's upset." He began folding his hands in his lap. "She didn't mean what she said the other night. You know how emotional she gets. She was just hurt." I took the armchair opposite him, keeping distance. "When was the last time either of you remembered my birthday without being reminded?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked, stammered. "That's not really what this is about, Alex. We're talking about family. February 14th, I said, my voice calm but sharp. Valentine's Day, hard to forget. Yet somehow you both managed for the past 12 years. He shifted uncomfortably, his salesman's veneer starting to crack. "We've been busy, you know that. But listen, this business opportunity is real. We're offering you a chance to invest, not just give handouts." I leaned forward. "Mark, last spring when I had knee surgery, I spent 3 days in recovery. Sarah came once. You sent a card. Do you remember what it said?" His face reddened. He shook his head. "It said, 'Get well soon, Alex. We'll call when things settle down.' That call never came. And now you want $200,000 from me." The mask slipped completely. His voice sharpened. "Fine, you want honesty? Sarah and I have been carrying this family since Helen died, hosting dinners, giving you purpose, keeping you from being alone. You owe us." I stood walking to the window where his BMW sat illegally parked in a loading zone, hazard lights blinking. "My purpose is not to bankroll your delusions, Mark. Not anymore." His composure broke. He shot up from the couch, pacing. "You'll regret this. When we're successful, when you're sitting here alone, you'll wish you'd believed in us." I turned slowly. "I am alone, Mark. The difference is I chose it." The words froze him in place. He grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood in the silence that followed the cheap bouquet still lying on the counter. I dropped it straight into the trash, plastic and all. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt. Only relief. The roses Mark had left behind were still sitting in the trash when my phone buzzed again the next morning. This time it was Sarah. Her message was short: "Dad, please. Let's talk. I'll bring pie." I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting it down. I already knew what was coming, apologies wrapped in nostalgia bait, to lure me back into the trap I had just escaped. Sure enough, by late afternoon, there was a knock on my door. Through the peephole, I saw her standing there, carefully dressed in a soft blue sweater, hair neatly brushed, a pastry box balanced in her hands. I opened the door, but kept my guard up. "Dad," she said brightly, holding up the box, "I brought your favorite apple pie from Morrison's bakery, just like Mom used to make." The scent of cinnamon drifted into the room as I let her step inside. She set the box down with ceremony, as though placing an offering before a king. Her eyes searched mine, glossy with carefully summoned tears. "Remember how Mom would bake one every Sunday after church?" she asked softly. I remembered, but not the way she told it. Helen had burned more pies than she'd perfected, laughing at her own mistakes, while we scraped off charred edges. The truth was sweeter than Sarah's performance because it had been real. What sat on my counter now was a polished replica, a store-bought memory disguised as love. I poured coffee for us both. She perched on the couch, purse neatly tucked beside her, waiting for her moment. Finally, she leaned forward. "Dad, I know you're angry, but you've always been there for me. School, plays, my wedding, everything. You've been the most supportive father anyone could ask for. And now, we really need you." Her voice wavered just enough to sound convincing, but I had lived long enough to hear the cracks. "When I had surgery last year," I said quietly, "do you remember how many times you visited me?" Her eyes darted away. "Dad, that's not fair. I was overwhelmed, work the kids. You came once, I cut in, brought flowers from the gift shop downstairs. That was it. Emma drove up twice. John called every day. I shook my head. And now you sit here asking me for more money, dressed up as family duty." The tears came then, whether real or rehearsed, I couldn't tell. "Dad, will lose the house without your help. The kids will be homeless. Please, just this once." I leaned back, letting her words hang in the air. "You told me not to expect to stay much longer." I listened. "Now you need to listen. I will not fund your survival anymore." She stood abruptly, brushing at her eyes, her voice rising with anger. "This isn't you. Mom would be ashamed of how cruel you've become." Her words stung, but I steadied myself. "Your mother would be ashamed of what dependency has done to you. She'd want you to stand on your own 2 feet, Sarah, not lean on mine until they break." She grabbed her purse, leaving the pie untouched on the counter, and stormed out. The door closed with a sharp click. I sat in the silence, staring at the box. Perfect crust, golden edges, flawless presentation. But no love inside. I slid it into the trash beside Mark's roses. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. The past might come knocking, but I no longer had to open the door. The apartment was quiet again, at least for a while. But quiet never lasts when you've just cut off people who depend on you, like vines strangling a tree. 3 nights after Sarah stormed out, the doorbell rang just as I was finishing dinner. I checked the peephole, and there was Mark again, his face rehearsed into what he thought looked apologetic. This time, though, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Sarah, mascara, smudged, clutching tissues, her eyes already swollen with prepackaged tears. I didn't open the door immediately. Instead, I watched. Mark shifted nervously, juggling a bouquet of flowers, roses again, red this time, as if changing the color could change the memory. Sarah whispered something, and he nodded, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a boardroom negotiation. When I finally cracked the door, Mark launched into his pitch. "Alex, please just hear us out. We came here because we don't want things to end like this. We're family," Sarah chimed in, her voice trembling. "Dad, I know I said terrible things. I was angry. I didn't mean them. But I had heard this song before and the lyrics never changed. I kept my foot braced against the doorframe. You didn't mean it when you told me not to expect to stay in your home. You didn't mean it when you said I wasn't part of this family. Her tears spilled over, running down her cheeks like streaks of melted paint. I was upset. Mark was upset. We've been under so much stress. I studied them both. Mark's hand tightened on the bouquet knuckles, whitening as his salesman's mask began to slip. We can't lose the house, Alex. We just need one more chance. With your help, my business will finally take off. There it was, the truth wrapped in sentiment, just like the pie, just like the roses. I felt something in me harden. When was the last time either of you came to see me in the hospital? I asked quietly. The silence on their faces was louder than any confession. Mark stammered, "That's not fair." It's fair, I cut in sharply. It's fair because I was there alone, and now you come here pretending this is about family when it's about money. Sarah's sobs grew louder, almost theatrical. Dad, please the kids, Emma, John, they need stability. Emma never asked me for a dime, I said. And John? Well, John is grown enough to learn responsibility. Maybe you should too. The air between us turned heavy. For the first time, Mark dropped the act, his voice low and edged. If you walk away from this, Alex, you'll regret it. You'll die alone in this apartment, and nobody will even notice. I leaned against the doorframe, meeting his glare with steady eyes. Better alone with dignity than surrounded by people who only see me as a wallet. I closed the door before Sarah could respond. The muffled sound of her sobs carried down the hall as their footsteps retreated. I turned off the lights, sat back in my chair, and listened to the silence. It wasn't empty. It was mine. The next evening, just as the sun dipped behind the Seattle skyline, another knock rattled my door. This time it wasn't Mark with flowers or Sarah with pie. It was both of them standing side by side. And they weren't alone. Behind them, I could see the shadow of my grandson, John, shifting his weight awkwardly in the hallway. I opened the door halfway but kept the chain latched. "What now?" I asked flatly. Sarah stepped forward, her hands clasped as if in prayer. "Dad, please, let us in. We can't keep fighting like this. We're family." Her voice cracked in all the right places, but after 75 years of life, I had learned to tell the difference between sincerity and performance. I left the chain where it was. "Say what you came to say." Mark cleared his throat, slipping into the tone of a practiced negotiator. "We've been thinking, Alex. Maybe we came on too strong. Maybe we didn't show enough appreciation. But the truth is, we need you. My business is right on the edge of success. With your support, we can turn it around. Sarah and we can't do this without you." John finally spoke up from the back. His words were hesitant, unpolished. "Grandpa, we're in a bad spot. The bank's threatening foreclosure. Mom and Dad are scared." I studied his face. He wasn't as good at hiding the truth as his parents. There was no conviction in his words, just the echo of things he'd been told to say. "I've already given you nearly $500,000, I said evenly. Weddings, tuition, medical bills, mortgage payments. What has it taught you?" Sarah's tears began again, spilling over as she shook her head. "It's taught us that we can count on you. That's what family does." "No," I said firmly, my voice carrying the weight of years. "What family does is show up. When I was in the hospital, who came? Not you, Sarah. Not you, Mark. Only Emma. And yet you expect me to keep writing checks as though that's the measure of love." Mark's face darkened. He leaned closer to the door, lowering his voice. "Alex, think carefully. If you walk away, you're destroying this family. People will talk. They'll say you abandoned your daughter and grandchildren. I almost laughed at the audacity. Let them talk. They didn't see you treating me like an inconvenience in my own home. They didn't hear Sarah telling me to leave if I wouldn't fund your fantasies. If reputation is all you're worried about, Mark, then you've already lost. John shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his sneakers. For a moment I thought I saw shame cross his face. But he stayed silent. I closed the door another inch, leaving just enough space for my final words. This conversation is over. I won't bankroll you anymore. When you're ready to apologize and live responsibly, then maybe we'll talk again. Until then, don't come back. The latch clicked as I secured the chain and shut the door fully. On the other side, Sarah's sobs filled the hallway, joined by Mark's angry muttering. Their footsteps finally faded, but in their place came a sound I hadn't heard in years. My own steady breathing, unburdened and free. It was only a matter of time before their next move. Manipulators don't quit. They regroup. A week later, on a chilly Thursday evening, the knock on my door was louder, more insistent. When I looked through the peephole, I froze. This time it wasn't just Sarah, Mark, and John. Standing in formation outside my apartment were 6 people. Mark's parents, Thomas and Linda, had joined the chorus. And behind them, almost out of place, stood Emma, my granddaughter, her eyes downcast. The scene looked more like an intervention than a family visit. Thomas pounded on the door with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Alex, open up. We need to talk." His deep voice reverberated through the hall. I opened the door just enough to face them, keeping my stance firm. Mark held flowers again. Sarah clutched tissues, John sulked in the back, and Thomas and Linda flanked them like backup singers in a cruel play. "You're destroying this family," Thomas declared. "Mark is a good man, just trying to provide. You should be helping young people get established." I let out a slow breath. I already did, for 15 years, to the tune of nearly $500,000. Weddings, mortgages, tuition cars, medical bills. What did I get in return? Forgotten birthdays, empty hospital rooms, a daughter who told me to get out of her home. Sarah's tears flowed as she stepped forward. "Dad, I didn't mean it. Please, the bank is threatening foreclosure. We'll lose everything." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you threatened to throw me out," I said coldly. Linda piped up her voice, sharp, polished with years of manipulation. "Family duty doesn't end when it gets hard. Your generation had it easier. It's your responsibility to make sure they succeed." I met her gaze without flinching. No. My responsibility was to raise Sarah to be independent. I failed at that when I allowed her to lean on me too long. That ends now. Mark's mask cracked, his voice rising. "You're being selfish. You'll die alone in this apartment. And when you do, no one will remember you." Before I could reply, Emma's voice cut through the noise. "Leave him alone." Her words were quiet, but sharp enough to silence the hallway. All eyes turned to her, the youngest in the group, the one they least expected to speak. She stepped closer to me, standing between me and the rest. "When did any of you visit him in the hospital? When did you remember his birthday without being told? You only come around when you want money. That's not family." Linda hissed, "Young lady, stay out of this. Adults are talking." "No," Emma said firmly, her eyes blazing. "Adults are begging, and Grandpa owes you nothing." The hallway erupted with overlapping voices, Sarah sobbing, Thomas lecturing Mark, shouting, John whining about fairness. But Emma stayed steady, her small frame shielding me with a strength beyond her years. I raised my hand. "Enough," my voice cut through the chaos. "This ends here. Until you come back with respect, not demands, you're not welcome. Emma, you are always welcome." I closed the door firmly, the the echo ringing like final judgment. On the other side, their argument carried on, but I no longer cared. For the first time, someone in that family had stood beside me, and it wasn't my daughter. I leaned against the door, listening to the chaos erupt in the hallway. Their voices clashed like cymbals in an off-key band, Mark shouting about respect, Sarah sobbing about losing the house, Thomas lecturing about legacy, Linda guilt-tripping about ungrateful children, and John whining about fairness. Only Emma's voice rose above the noise with clarity. "Leave Grandpa alone. He doesn't owe you anything." Their arguments spilled into fragments I could barely make out. Selfish old man. Doesn't understand family. Everything we've done for him. Each accusation landed like a dart, but none pierced me anymore. I had built too many walls, and this time they weren't made of money, they were made of resolve. I finally pulled away from the door and walked to the window. 4 stories below, the streetlights painted the pavement in amber. I could see Mark's BMW parked illegally again, hazard lights blinking like a metronome keeping time to their manipulation. My reflection in the glass surprised me. My jaw was set, my shoulders straight. I didn't look like a man defeated. I looked like a man who had finally remembered who he was. The pounding on the door came again, this time from Thomas. "Alex, open this door. Family doesn't abandon family. Think about your legacy. Don't you want to leave something behind for your daughter?" I almost laughed. "My legacy isn't money," I called through the door. "My legacy is teaching responsibility. And enabling failure isn't love, it's betrayal." Linda snapped back, her voice shrill. "What will people say? An old man throwing his daughter out on the street. Do you want your name dragged through the mud?" I let the silence hang for a beat before replying. "They already dragged my name through the mud when they reduced me to a wallet. I survived that. I'll survive this." Inside my chest, I felt something powerful, a calm anger, steady and righteous. I had been silent too long, tolerating disrespect in the name of peace. But now I understood peace bought with silence was just surrender in disguise. I opened the door again, just a crack enough for them to see my eyes. "You all came here thinking I'd fold. You thought if you showed up together, I'd cave to pressure. But hear me clearly, I gave Sarah and Mark $487,000. Weddings, tuition cars, mortgages, and when I needed them, when I lay in a hospital bed, they were nowhere. That's not family. That's exploitation." Mark's face turned red, veins bulging at his temples. "You'll regret this." I shook my head slowly. "No, Mark. The only thing I regret is letting it go on this long." Then I shut the door, locking it with deliberate finality. On the other side, their voices rose again, overlapping, angry, desperate. But their words no longer reached me. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening. I walked back to my chair, sat down, and let the quiet return. The silence wasn't heavy, it was steady. It wasn't forced, it was chosen. And in that moment, I realized I had won the first real battle of my life since Helen passed. I sat in my chair long after the last knock faded, listening to the muffled echoes of their arguing drift down the hall. The building's thin walls carried every word, Sarah crying that I'd abandoned her, Thomas railing about family duty, Linda whispering poison about ungrateful fathers, and Mark barking orders as if he still controlled the room. But louder than all of them was Emma's voice, steady, calm, and sharp as a blade. "You only show up when you want money. You've never cared about him as a person." Her words cut through their noise like a bell tolling in the night. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, letting the sound of her defense wash over me. For years, I had wondered if anyone in that family truly saw me beyond what I could provide. And now I knew. Emma did. Eventually, their voices drifted away. Through the window, I watched them scatter under the streetlights. Mark stormed toward his BMW, Thomas and Linda corralled Sarah into their truck, and John shuffled behind them, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Only Emma lingered. She looked up toward my building, her eyes searching the fourth-floor windows until she spotted me. She raised a hand and waved. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than any words Sarah had ever spoken in my defense. I raised my hand in return. No words passed between us, but everything was understood. She saw me, and I saw her. When I finally sat back down, I realized how steady my breathing had become. No anger, no panic, no guilt, just calm. I had drawn a line, and for the first time in my life, I had kept it. The phone buzzed later that night. Unsurprisingly, it was Sarah. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a slurry of tears and desperation. "Dad, please don't do this. We'll lose everything. Mark says we can't keep going without you. Please, just this once." I deleted it without listening to the end. Then almost immediately, another call came. This time it was Emma. I answered before the second ring. "Grandpa," her voice was tired but steady. "I just wanted to say, thank you for standing your ground. They're furious, but you did the right thing." My throat tightened. "Emma, you're the only one who understands. You've never asked me for a thing, and yet you've given me more than they ever have: respect." There was a pause, then her soft reply. "That's because you've given me what really matters. Love. Time. That's worth more than money." After we hung up, I walked back to the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a reminder that life stretched beyond their demands. For the first time in years, I felt like I had choices again. I wasn't trapped in their house, their arguments, or their endless hunger for more. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to the silence, "I choose me now." And for the first time since Helen's passing, I believed it. The morning after that storm of voices in my hallway, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Sunlight streamed through the blinds of my small apartment, and instead of dread, I felt purpose. The time for half measures was over. I had ended the transfers, shredded Sarah's power of attorney, and drawn boundaries. But I knew my daughter and son-in-law well enough to understand they wouldn't stop. They'd regroup, reframe, and come back again. If I wanted peace for the rest of my days, I needed more than words. I needed protection carved into stone. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across a heavy oak desk from Robert Fisher, the attorney who had already helped me draft basic protections. His office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, the kind of place where permanence was inked into paper. He looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Miller, we can make this airtight. A Nevada Asset Protection Trust. Irrevocable. Once it's done, there's no way for your daughter or son-in-law to reach these funds, even if they try legal action." "Good," I said firmly. "Do it. And make Emma the sole beneficiary." Robert's pen paused above the legal pad. "Not Sarah," I shook my head. "She's had her share, more than her share. Nearly $500,000, and she still demanded more. No, this time I'm leaving my legacy to someone who respects me, not someone who sees me as a bank account." The lawyer nodded. "Then Emma it is." For the next 2 hours, I signed document after document, each one notarized, stamped, and sealed. Each signature felt like another lock snapping shut on the vault of my life's work. My military pension, the remainder of Helen's insurance, the savings we had built, through decades of sacrifice, all of it moved behind walls Sarah and Mark would never climb. When the notary pressed her final stamp onto the page, Robert leaned back. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller. Your assets are now secure. You've built yourself a fortress." I exhaled slowly, the weight lifting off my chest. For 15 years, I had been carrying everyone else's burdens, letting them chip away at what Helen and I had built. Now at 75, I finally had the courage to carry only my own. As I walked out of the law office, portfolio in hand, I felt the city around me differently. The streets weren't hostile or lonely. They were mine to walk, mine to explore. I passed couples rushing to work, parents guiding children, young professionals on phones. And for once, I didn't feel envy for their lives. I felt satisfaction in reclaiming my own. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table, trust documents spread before me. I traced my finger over Emma's name, written clearly as the sole heir. Helen would have approved, I thought. Our granddaughter had shown more loyalty in one evening than Sarah had in 15 years. I raised a glass of water, a small toast to the silence, to freedom, to dignity, to tomorrow. And for the first time in a long while, I slept without fear of the next knock at the door. The week after I finalized the trust, I met with Kate Anderson, a realtor I'd found through a fellow veteran. We drove through neighborhoods east of the city, past tree-lined streets, where the air felt cleaner, calmer. "I think I've got something you'll like, Mr. Miller," she said, pulling into a quiet lane near Lake Washington. At the end of it sat a modest two-bedroom cottage, white shutters framing the windows, a wide porch looking out over the water. From the moment I stepped out of the car, I knew. The lake stretched beyond the yard, its surface shimmering in the afternoon sun. A heron stood near the reeds, still as stone. The air carried none of the weight of slammed doors or angry voices, only the faint smell of pine and water. Inside the cottage was simple but warm. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, and a stone fireplace anchored the living room. "Perfect for one person," Kate explained. "But room enough if you want company. Garden space out back." The previous owner was a veteran too. He wanted it to go to someone who'd appreciate it. I ran my hand over the kitchen counter, smooth from years of use. It wasn't grand, it wasn't extravagant, but it was mine the moment I saw it. "I'll take it," I said, without hesitation. Kate blinked. "Don't you want to see the bedroom at least?" I shook my head. "I don't need to. This place feels like home." That evening, we drew up the paperwork. I paid the asking price in full cash from the accounts Robert had secured. No mortgage, no ties, no one to hold it over my head. When I signed the last page, I felt the same rush of liberation I'd felt in the lawyer's office. Except this time, it wasn't just money I was protecting. It was my peace. Moving in was simple. The movers carried my few boxes, books, clothes, Helen's jewelry box, my medals into the cottage within an hour. I arranged them carefully, the medals above the fireplace, the photos of Helen on the mantel, the books stacked neatly in a small study. Outside on the porch, I set a chair facing the lake. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water copper, I was sitting in that chair, a cup of coffee in hand, listening to the lapping waves. For the first time since Helen's death, I felt her presence not as grief, but as comfort. She would have loved this place, the garden, the stillness, the lake. She would have said, "Alex, this is where you were meant to end up. Not in a house where you're disrespected, but in a home where you're free." As twilight settled, I thought of Sarah and Mark. By now they'd discovered the empty room, the shredded documents, the vanished transfers. Their house of cards was collapsing, and I no longer cared. My life was no longer tethered to their failures. That night, sitting on the porch of my new home, I realized something profound. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life Helen had always wanted me to live, one built on dignity, not debt to family who treated love like a transaction. A week after I moved into the cottage, I found myself standing outside the Bathau Veterans Center, a place I hadn't visited in years. The old brick building hadn't changed, same flag out front, same bulletin board cluttered with flyers for community dinners and support groups. But stepping through the doors felt different this time. I wasn't coming here as a man burdened by guilt or obligation. I was coming as a man free to choose how to spend his days. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of stew and fresh bread. Long tables were already filling with men and women who had worn uniforms decades earlier, but still carried the quiet dignity of service. I nodded at familiar faces, men I'd served alongside or met in passing at reunions. Alex Miller, one of them, said with surprise. "Haven't seen you here in years. Life had me busy," I replied with a half smile. "But I've got time now." The evening flowed with easy conversation. We talked about old battles, about aching knees and grandchildren, about the strange ways the world had changed since we wore boots and carried rifles. There was no judgment here, no manipulation, only camaraderie forged by shared sacrifice. It was during dessert that I first noticed her. Mary Johnson, silver hair, neatly pinned, warm brown eyes behind tasteful glasses, moved between tables carrying trays of apple pie. She wasn't just serving food, she was listening, nodding, offering a word of encouragement to every man she passed. When she reached me, she smiled. "Haven't seen you here before." "First time in a long while," I said, accepting a slice. "I'm here every week," she replied. "Volunteering keeps me busy since I retired. Lost my husband 5 years ago, heart attack. Teaching filled the gap for a while, but I still needed something to do with my evenings." Her honesty disarmed me. We sat talking long after dessert plates were cleared. She told me about her 37 years teaching 4th grade, about the 2 children she raised, who now lived responsibly across the country. I told her about Helen, about my service, about the mistake of letting my daughter use me as her safety net for too long. Mary didn't judge. She simply listened, her eyes reflecting the kind of understanding only someone who had lived through loss could offer. "Independence at our age feels revolutionary, doesn't it?" she said softly. I nodded. I forgot what it was like. For 15 years, I was nothing but an ATM. "Not anymore," she said, her smile gentle but firm. "Now you get to decide what kind of life you want." When the janitor began stacking chairs, Mary gathered her things. I hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to get coffee sometime outside of here?" Her smile widened. "I'd like that very much." As I drove back to the cottage that night, the lake glimmering under the moonlight, I realized something remarkable. In freeing myself from the chains of Sarah and Mark's demands, I had opened the door to something new, companionship built not on guilt, but on mutual respect. It wasn't revenge that warmed me as I walked into my home. It was hope. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, the cottage no longer felt new. It felt lived in, like it had been waiting for me all along. Helen's photographs stood proudly on the mantel, my medals hung above the fireplace, and the kitchen smelled of roasted turkey as I basted the bird for the 3rd time that morning. But this year's dinner table looked different from the ones I'd endured at Sarah's house. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda, no silence meant to punish. Instead, there was anticipation. Emma was the first to arrive, carrying a pumpkin pie she'd baked herself. She stepped into the kitchen with a smile that reminded me so much of Helen that my chest ached. "Grandpa, I wanted to do this myself. No store-bought shortcuts." I hugged her tight. "Your grandmother would be proud." Not long after, John showed up, balancing a basket of dinner rolls still warm from the oven. His shoulders didn't slump like they used to, and there was a new steadiness in his voice when he said, "Frank's garage is keeping me busy. He says I'm catching on fast." I clapped him on the back. "That's the best news I've heard in years." When Mary arrived with a tray of roasted vegetables, it felt complete. The four of us, an old soldier, a kind widow, a granddaughter with courage, and a grandson learning responsibility, formed what I came to call my chosen family. We sat around the wooden table I'd bought secondhand and decorated with a simple cloth. No fine china, no crystal glasses, but plenty of laughter. As the turkey was carved and plates filled, the conversation flowed naturally. Emma talked about her studies, John about the cars he was working on. Mary shared stories from her teaching days that had us chuckling between bites. There was no tension, no storm waiting beneath the surface. Only peace. Halfway through dessert, my phone buzzed. Sarah's name lit the screen. I saw Emma glance at it, then back at me. "You don't have to answer," she said gently. I pressed the button to silence the call and set the phone aside. "No, I don't." It rang again 10 minutes later, then again after that. Each time I ignored it. The pie on my plate, baked by my granddaughter's hands, mattered more than whatever guilt-ridden plea Sarah was rehearsing on the other end. Grandpa John said quietly, "Mom, she's not doing well, but I think she has to go through this. She has to learn the hard way." I nodded. "We all do, son. Life teaches lessons money never can." As the evening wound down, we lingered at the table, none of us eager to leave the warmth of the cottage. Outside, Lake Washington reflected the glow of the setting sun, casting copper streaks across the water. Inside, laughter and conversation filled the space that once would have been heavy with unspoken resentment. When Emma stood to help Mary clear the table, I looked around at the faces of those who sat with me, not because of obligation, not because of what I could give them, but because they wanted to. For the first time in decades, I thought this is what family is supposed to feel like. The knock came on my door 2 days after Thanksgiving. It wasn't the confident pounding of Thomas, nor the impatient hammering of Mark. It was softer, uneven, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, Sarah stood there alone. Her hair was unkempt. Her clothes looked worn, and the spark of defiance I had once known in her eyes had dimmed. She clutched her purse like it was the last thing tethering her to dignity. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please. I need to talk to you." Mary, who had been sitting in the living room with a book, glanced up at me. I gave her a small nod before stepping aside. Sarah entered, her gaze sweeping over the cottage. She took in the photos on the mantel, the warm fire in the hearth, the peaceful order of a home built on respect instead of resentment. Her face crumpled. "I lost the apartment," she admitted, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The landlord evicted us last week. I've been staying in a cheap motel, but I can't afford it much longer. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do." Tears spilled freely now. Not the strategic ones she'd wielded before, but the kind born of desperation. "Please, Dad. Just 5,000. Enough for first month's rent and a deposit. I swear I'll pay it back." The old me might have reached for my checkbook, but I had learned too much, sacrificed too much to let guilt dictate my future again. I looked at her carefully. "Sarah, I love you. But giving you money won't save you. It'll only keep you from saving yourself." She dropped into a chair, sobbing. "This isn't fair. You chose this house, this life over me, over your own daughter." Mary set her book aside and rose. She placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "Your father didn't choose this house over you. He chose dignity. He chose self-respect. For 15 years, he gave, and you never once gave back. That's not family, it's dependency." And it nearly broke him. Sarah's head snapped up. "Who are you to judge? You're not part of this family." Mary didn't flinch. I'm someone who knows what it's like to lose a husband, to build a life alone, and to stand on my own 2 feet. Your father is teaching you the same lesson. It's time you learned." Sarah's shoulders slumped. She looked smaller somehow, her strength gone. "I don't know how to do this. I've never had to." "You're 48 years old," I said quietly. "It's time." When she finally left, her sobs echoing into the night, Emma arrived with a pie she had baked, her face glowing with the quiet pride of someone who had chosen to stand on her own side of the line. John followed an hour later, bringing stories of his job at Frank's garage and the first paycheck he had earned with his own 2 hands. As the 4 of us sat down to a simple meal, I realized something profound. My blood family might have fractured, but my chosen family was whole. Sarah's absence hurt, but her tears did not move me anymore. Because in choosing myself, I had finally chosen freedom. Looking back now, I see my daughter's ultimatum as a turning point, not an ending. When Sarah told me I wasn't welcome if I didn't sign her husband's loan, she thought she was casting me out. In reality, she set me free. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice without limits, that being a father meant carrying burdens no matter the cost. But the truth is, unchecked, giving only breeds entitlement. In protecting my assets and building a trust for Emma, I didn't just secure money, I reclaimed my dignity. Watching John find pride in honest work reminded me that tough love is still love. And with Mary at my side, I discovered companionship that wasn't bought or demanded, but freely given. I know many parents my age struggle with the same question: when does helping become enabling? My story is proof that saying no isn't cruelty. It's sometimes the greatest act of love. If you're a parent still carrying children who should stand on their own, think hard. Are you protecting them, or are you preventing them from growing? Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where family demanded more than love should require? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments, I'd like to know. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening. And remember, true love respects, it doesn't consume, doesn't.